Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Conversation at Noon. My name is Rebecca Tabor. I'm the director of the Connecticut History Day program. And today on our program, we're going to be talking a little bit about the History Day program, and really excited to have students and teachers joining us today. If you're not familiar with Connecticut History Day, CHD is one of 58 programs, affiliate programs of National History Day, and it's an academic program in which students in grades 6th through 12th conduct original research on self-selected topics that relate to an annual theme, which last year was debate and diplomacy in history, successes, failures, consequences. Participants can work alone or in a group on their project, and they choose how they would like to present it. They can choose to do an exhibit, design a website, write a paper, do a performance, or create a documentary. Students can choose to participate in one of 6 regional contests that are held here in Connecticut. And from there, if they win at regionals, they can continue on to the state contest, and the top 2 students in each category at states continue on to the national contest. This is really a participatory program, and we are thankful to have a lot of volunteers to help us, because at each level of competition, a team of 2 to 3 judges review projects and provide feedback for all of the students who participate. And students are encouraged to use that feedback to continue to improve their their project. Today, we have an opportunity to chat with some of the teachers and students who participate in Connecticut History Day, and we're going to hear about their experiences. We'll also have an opportunity to learn about a special program related to National History Day called Sacrifice for Freedom, in which we had a Connecticut team of a student and teacher participate. Let's start, though, by introducing our panelists for today's program. We are first joined by Sophia Carrier and Kathia Diaz. They are 10th graders at Enfield High School. This is I think they're going on to their 3rd year of participating in History Day. Their project from last year was the Gold Standards Control Over the Working Class, William Jennings Bryan's Crusade to End Economic Disparity in America. They finished first place in senior group performance at the 2022 state contest, and they finished 8th place nationally in the national contest for senior group performance. Welcome, ladies. We're glad to have you with us today. Next, we're joined by Marianne Joy Montenegro, who just finished up her grade 8 at Nathan Hale Middle School in Norwalk. Marianne was part of a junior group exhibit team. She had 3 other teammates, and they did a project on the Cuban Missile Crisis, the diplomatic dilemma, and they finished 2nd place junior group exhibit at the 2022 state contest. They finished 6th place in junior group exhibit and received the Outstanding Connecticut Entry Junior Division prize at the 2022 national contest. So thank you, Marianne, for joining us today. Our 4th student is Nicholas Angeli, who is a rising 12th grader at Rockville High School in Vernon. Nick has participated in History Day in grades 6 through 8, and then last year in grade 11. He qualified for states all 4 years of his participation, and in 2019 placed 3rd at the state contest. This past year, he went with Mrs. Regina Lee to participate in the Sacrifice for Freedom Teacher-Student Institute. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that fabulous experience. So welcome to our students. Thank you for joining us at the start of a school year when it's super busy, and we appreciate you being with us. We have 2 teachers who are joining us today because really there would be no History Day program without wonderful teachers. And we're joined first by Regina Lee. Regina is a teacher at Vernon Center Middle School. She was the 2021 Vernon Teacher of the Year, and in 2020 was the Connecticut nominee for the National History Day Patricia Baring Teacher Award in the Junior Division. She, along with Nick, was the Connecticut team who represented Connecticut in the Sacrifice for Freedom Teacher-Student Institute, and she is in her 11th year of participating in History Day. We're also joined by John Smith-Horn. Mr. Smith-Horn is a teacher at Timothy Edwards School in South Windsor. He is last year's Connecticut nominee for the Patricia Baring Teacher Award Junior Division. John is in his 8th year of participating in Connecticut History Day. And in addition to teaching, Mr. Smith-Horn is well known for judging at contests from the regional level up through the national level, and we couldn't do it without him. So happy to have you with us today, John. Thank you. Thank you to all of our guests for joining us. So I'd like to start our conversation, and before we get started asking questions, I should mention to our viewers that if you have a comment or a question, we can see your comments and we can see your questions. So we would love to have you ask anything, and we will ask our panelists those questions if should they come up. But for our students, I'd like to start with just asking you in general, tell us about your experience with Connecticut History Day. I think everyone has participated multiple years. What brings you back year after year to participate in History Day? And maybe, yeah, if you want to raise your hand, or because we don't have the little, or I can call on someone. All right. You're going to start us off, Kathia. Thank you.
Hi, guys. So I've been doing Connecticut History Day for 2 years already. I'm going to be starting with luck for Frontiers, our 3rd year with my partner, Sophie. What brings me back each year is probably going in depth to a specific topic, really getting to know more than just the general knowledge or what someone else would know, and being able to specifically teach someone about a forgotten piece of our history and our culture. I think that's really interesting.
Well, I know every year as I'm looking at the entries, I always learn something, because oftentimes projects cover a part of history that I'm very unfamiliar with. Sophia, did you have any thoughts on why you come back to History Day year after year?
I like coming back over and over again because I get to learn a lot about topics such as the gold standard, which was our topic last year, which is something that I probably wouldn't have researched and learned about otherwise. I think History Day is a fun and competitive way to learn new things in a fun and creative manner.
Nick, so you'll be going into, I think if I'm doing the math right, your 5th year of participating. What do you like about History Day that brings you back to keep working on a project?
Oh, I really just like the fact that it gives me a way to kind of put the Pacific Theater out there more, because that's my area of studies. I like to study the Pacific Theater, World War II, which is always kind of the forgotten part of the war because everyone always focuses on Europe. So it really allows me to kind of express that history and show other people that, hey, this happened. I mean, we should care about this. You need to learn about this to really understand what happened in World War II.
And Marianne, does your team plan to participate again next year? I know you're kind of going up to high school. What did you like best about participating with History Day?
I can't say for my team, but I do plan on participating next year. The thing I like most about History Day is that I get to study more on the topics that I'm interested in. Like the Cuban Missile Crisis, I've only had like a few cursory glances at it, but it was really interesting to read more about it and how it really went down.
I think one of the things that comes through with the project students do is the fact that you can choose your own topic and get to study what you'd like to do. And is that something that is one of the kind of attractive things about History Day for students, do you think? Well, let me ask our 2 teacher panelists. Both of you, Regina and John, have been involved for many, many years now. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Connecticut History Day, and how did you get involved, and why do you think the program is so beneficial for students?
I guess I'll go first because John is a gentleman and he allowed me to do that. I became involved about 11 years ago, and I remember coming to the Old State House with my co-mentor, Cindy McManaman, and there was a map at the Old State House of the districts that participated in History Day. And Vernon was not colored in. You know, all the districts that participated were colored in red, and Vernon was just a big white spot in the middle of that map. And I thought, why don't we offer that to our students? Clearly, there are other districts that are doing this, and it's important. And then I got to walk around and I got to look at the projects, and looking at the quality of the student work on that day, when I knew very little about what History Day was, I was blown away. Students, you know, at the 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade level were doing research and work that you sometimes don't even see at a college level. I just thought the quality of the research and the quality of the analysis was so rich that I wanted that for all of my students. And it was hard at first to bring a new program into the district. You know, not everybody was on board. I had to really work with the schedule that was available here, which was not always easy. We ended up making it an after-school program, but it has been one of the most enriching experiences for Vernon Public Schools, and has continued to just grow. I'm really just proud of the kind of research and skills that our students have gotten from it.
All right, I'll jump in on that. I can echo pretty much everything Regina just said, but I think what draws me back to it is the engagement for students. The idea that I have students that start a project or the first time in middle school, and really challenge themselves. And exactly, I think, echoing again some other comments, students get to choose a topic. I remember a student a couple of years ago who was just thrilled to study her topic and it was an individual, Marie Curie, as it turns out, because in previous years they had done some type of list of famous individuals in history, and the teacher had assigned individuals for the students. Didn't ask them their choice, just assign them, and it was sort of disappointing from that factor. I also think the idea of the student choosing the type of project that they want to do is so engaging. And for me, it's the student interaction, student to student, as well as teacher to student, as you're preparing at the regional level, at the state level, and ultimately coming together, and hopefully at the national level. I tell people all the time, it's my absolute favorite. I do quite a number of different competitions and activities like debate and a few other types of activities like that at the middle school. But History Day is absolutely my favorite.
And John, I know that one thing that I have seen with the whole student-to-student mentoring, especially at your school, is that when students graduate and go on to the high school, I'm thinking of Inya, who I know was your student for many years. She is now in high school, but she comes back and mentors middle school students. And I've seen that with other programs where students who have done History Day for a couple of years, they will actually mentor other students. And it really does become that peer-to-peer sharing experience.
I actually had a text that like a week or so ago from another student up at the high school, Bhavni Krishna, who had gone to nationals 2 years ago, and she was talking about being ready to mentor kids. She's a rising 10th grader this year, and she's very happy to come back and kind of support students in whatever way she possibly can. And exactly that. There's another beautiful aspect of History Day.
And I think that's really true. One of the things obviously I'm a big fan of History Day. It's my kind of my life's work. But one of the things I really love seeing with History Day is that there's a competitiveness, but it's a friendly competitiveness, because I remember one of my favorite stories is when we were at nationals one year and a performance group had come, I think from perhaps American Samoa, and they misunderstood and didn't bring any of their props. So they were running around trying to find props to borrow for their performance. And John, your group, who did the project on the Beecher family, if I remember correctly, they wholeheartedly said, here, take our stuff. You can use, what can you use that we have? And just that sense of kind of camaraderie is a really wonderful thing to see among students, and which we hope to see soon this year. And as we return to in-person, fingers crossed, contests. For our students who are with us, could you talk a little bit, as I was introducing everyone, I did mention some of your projects, but if you could talk a little bit about your projects from last year and how did you find your topic? Because there's really an eclectic group of topics there. As I mentioned in the intro, every project needs to relate to an annual theme. Last year it was debate and diplomacy. This year we're looking at frontiers in history, people, places, ideas. But first of all, how did you find your topic to explore? And what kind of, because I think maybe some of our viewers might not be familiar with History Day, what kind of research did you do to support your topic? So it's kind of a two-part question for everyone. Okay, Nick, you're up.
So I always tend to start with just looking at World War II as a whole and then kind of focusing more on the Pacific. So I started to do that. With debate and diplomacy, the main thing that really stuck out was Pearl Harbor and how everybody said it was an unprovoked attack, when really, if you look like previously, like prior to the attack itself, there's a lot of diplomatic attempts that completely failed, which is what led to the attack on Pearl Harbor and the U.S. involvement in World War II. So I kind of ran with that.
Research did you do?
And just start with like the National World War II Museum. A lot of National World War II Museum to kind of start with. And then from there, I branched off as I'd find more leads and things like that. So it was like National World War II Museum. Then I went to like different archives, and I kind of just bounced around from website to website until the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor rolled around, and a bunch of articles were released and about like a bunch of books were released. So I kind of picked those up, and I just kept going based off what was available to me.
Great, thank you. Marianne, did you want to talk a little bit about the topic your team explored and what kind of research you did for it?
We chose the Cuban Missile Crisis, and well, I mean, since it wasn't, I chose it because I was always fascinated with the Cold War, and fascinated with the Cold War and how it affected everything, basically, from South Korea, North Korea to the current state of Russia and the U.S. And I always like the Cuban Missile Crisis, reading about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because it was a really terrifying time. It was basically the culmination of all the political pressures and the fear of nuclear war, like ending the world. And it was just a dangerous time, and it was really interesting to see how we navigated out of that situation and what we can do to we can use that situation as an example how to conduct ourselves in similar situations in the future. And as for research, our team, just since the Cold War is more modern, it was quite easy to find some scans and archives lying around.
Great, thank you. And how about our performance team?
How I found our project this year was actually in our history class. My teacher asked me to present a project based on the economy. And when I was looking through all of the stuff, I found the gold standard. And it was based off of the election of 1896. It was William Jennings Bryan versus William McKinley. And I found that it fit the theme very well, as Bryan wanted to promote a gold and silver movement to end the metamorphical crucifixion of the working class. However, McKinley wanted to maintain the gold standard to avoid the influx of money into our economy, which would result in major inflation.
Kathia, can you talk a little bit about where your team went for research and how you kind of went about that process?
Yeah, of course. So we first started with looking into general knowledge articles. That's how usually we start every year. This would be like simple, short news articles or short paragraphs that you find on books, like blurbs. they usually get you like keywords or main ideas that are really prominent throughout basically every source you look at. Then using like databases or sites, we just look up those keywords and eventually you just keep finding more and more. And that's how you keep learning deeper about the topic. You find these keywords that are repeated throughout. And then this usually leads to like a big break. Like that's how we found our main character, William McKinley, for our performance.
Great. Well, we have a question from the audience, which I'm going to share and get perhaps everyone, both students and teachers, reaction to it. So from Jenny Groom, she's asking, how can institutions help students who can't travel to our location? Ms. Groom is a librarian at the Connecticut State Library, and she's working on redoing the State Library's guide. So it's not just a list of suggested resources. So how can institutions help students research if they can't get to the actual location? What advice would you have? Regina.
I'm going to chime in because I want to give you an example of something that happened to one of our teams this year. The documentation or the documents that they needed were actually housed at University of Chicago, and they really needed those documents to prove one of their points. So we requested the documents. They told us that since none of us were students or faculty at the University of Chicago, it would take 6 to 8 weeks for them to even look at the request. And then we ended up paying, like $56 in copy fees for them to send us the documents. But because there were so many, they would only send a maximum of like 50 pages. And it turned out that it was the wrong 50 pages. And by then we didn't have time to order anymore. So making documents accessible in digital format, even if students had to pay, or teachers had to pay a small fee to look at them, would be really helpful, because none of us could travel to Chicago to pick up these boxes in person. So we were sort of at the mercy of waiting for somebody to go through them themselves and then send us the information. The best thing for our students, because you're right, a lot of them can't travel to some of these physical locations, is to be able to have things as digitized as much as possible. And I know that's a tremendous time and expense, but it's really the way of the world, having digital collections that students can look through, even if teachers have to sign up for some sort of a fee-based registration or something, would be really helpful for my kids.
Your other thoughts by our panelists? John.
Yeah, I agree that, it's helpful you can go to a website, you can go to an archives online and have a sense of what's there. I think it's so helpful when there's contact information, who can I get in contact with? And that person obviously responds in a timely manner. I can think of the Prudence Crandall Home and Museum, where we've contacted that I had students who contacted that individual. And I thought what was fascinating was that, what is it that you'd like to know? What is it that's information available to you? Or some of the places, I had a student a few years ago who did a project on the Temperance Movement during Prohibition. And there's an individual library in Ohio that houses a tremendous number of archives and pamphlets from this one temperance group that was based in Ohio. And they were so accommodating once we contacted them. I think that's the idea of what's available, not only in an archive somewhere, but how accessible it becomes. And I think that's the idea of how agreeable someone can be to say, you can contact us and you can ask for information, because I think that always is the issue when you move outside of a very, very localized. If you did something in your hometown or in your region, that certainly has a certain access for you. But I think there's others that really just give you that great access, by advertising it, posting it and information. I know, like Jenny referenced in her question, the idea of how can we do this? Can we give you some suggested areas of study or resources? Absolutely. I think that would be great. And kind of even eras with sort of subtopics within that, I think is always helpful. So.
And Jenny followed up asking, can institutions combine suggested area of study and resources so that a student would only have to go to one or two places to look, which I personally, I'm going to speak for myself with my history experience. I think that would be a fabulous suggestion where you have a few places to go and then you see a variety of resources. We are working for those folks who are participating this year. We always do a list of Connecticut topics, and we'll be posting that on our website and sending it out soon. And what we try to do is give suggestions for like a first step. You know, ConnecticutHistory.org is a great place to start with if you're doing a Connecticut topic. And they tell you, you know, you can go to this museum or go to this archive. John, I think you also brought up something that's really important, which is think about contacting people. I'm the daughter and granddaughter of librarians. And I have to tell you, like, they get excited. Like, this is a challenge to them and they will help you. And, you know, oftentimes libraries will have resources in terms of databases that you might not have known about. But, you know, I get emails from excited museum colleagues when they have a History Day student come to visit. And they're like, oh, Rebecca, we had a History Day student and they did their project on A, B, and C. And they get really excited. So, talking to folks is really helpful. Students, do you have any other suggestions for, you know, because, you know, we've been in kind of COVID lockdown for 2 or 3 years. So a lot of research had to be done online. And even now, you can't always jump in the car and go somewhere. So do you have suggestions for how institutions could make archives more accessible to online use? Any ideas from our students? Yes, Nick.
So I mean, the obvious one would be like to digitize it and things like that, so it's more accessible. But if we were able to like section it off by era, I think that was said earlier as well. That makes it a lot easier to kind of pinpoint exactly what you're trying to find. And once you do that, it just kind of branches off from there, and it gets a lot easier. So if we can pinpoint it by era and time frame, it just makes everything a lot easier for us.
Great idea. Thank you. Well, on today's, as I mentioned in our introduction, there are 5 different categories that students can choose to participate in. Papers, websites, documentaries, exhibits, and performances. On today's program, we have 2 folks who did exhibits and 1 team who did a performance. So I want to just ask each of our students, how did you choose your how and why did you choose the category that you did? Have you stayed in the same category through all of your participation? And why do you like it so much? How about we start with our performance team? Do you want to talk a little bit about why you chose to do performances and what do you like best about it?
So we using performance back our 8th grade year, the first year we did it, and we're going to continue to do it again next year because when we first heard about it, our mentor, our teacher, told us you have to do a performance. And we were a bit confused why, but then we found out that actually a lot less students choose performance and it's more likely to place. I was particularly nervous about it because I don't like performing in front of others, but I've also learned that it isn't about how we perform it and how we act, it's how we present it and what information we should choose to do in the 10 minutes that we have. It is a very creative way to show a topic that was back in history because then we can relate to those characters more and pretend we were them.
Would one of our exhibit folks like to speak about why you choose to do exhibits and what you like best about the category? Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about your team and exhibits?
Personally, I find it easier to cooperate with other people within the exhibit category because you can easily section off specific duties. Like one person can go edit the images and one person can go proofread all the text, and it's just easier because since there's a lot of moving parts, we can keep everyone busy without without excluding anyone. And also, it's more. And personally, I find it's more easier for me to digest information if it's presented in a in a physical manner, like exhibits.
Great. How about you, Nick? What do you like best about exhibits?
So I do an individual exhibit, and I just like kind of having full control over everything I do, so I can kind of pick and choose what I want on my board and what I don't want on my board. And I also like the creativity aspect. Like I tend to do a diorama kind of thing, modeling the battles. That's my big creativity thing. And like I just like that physical presence of an exhibit there. You can do a lot with it, and you can really just make it stand out over all the other ones if you're good enough at it.
Right. And I wanted to just kind of follow up. Marianne brought it up in terms of working as a team. So, Kathia and Sophia, how did you parcel out all the different duties of doing a History Day project as a duo? Go ahead, Kathia.
So it took a while to get used to knowing what different fields we were both personally good at. There were different sections when it comes to doing a performance. There's like writing the script and then doing all the paperwork, like the process paper, the title page, and bibliography. We sort of split that in between on how we knew ourselves and what we were good at. I took charge of writing partially a majority of the bibliography, while Sophie took a lot of writing and setting up the script and dividing everything into scenes so it's more easy to access and edit in the future, because we did end up having a lot of drafts, more than 14 at some points.
Wow. Yeah, I think people who are not familiar with History Day don't quite realize the months of research and work it takes to do a project that goes into really doing an outstanding project. I'd like to ask all of the students, what skills do you think you've learned from being a History Day participant over the years? Nick.
I'm just going to say the obvious one, which is just research skills, because you really need to do a lot of in-depth research if you want any chance at winning. And just being in History Day, I've learned how to pinpoint like primary and secondary sources, what the differences are, how to use certain sources to like my advantage and things like that. So it helped me to be successful in the classroom as well as History Day. And I think that's like the biggest thing I've taken away from it so far.
Would one of our ladies like to go next? What skills do you think you've learned?
I
Marianne?
think I've gotten better at cooperating with other people when it comes to large projects. And also just critical thinking skills. It's important to learn. It's important to see this a very nuanced piece of history in a in a in a different light. Sometimes, since there's many perspectives, and you want to try to get everything related to the theme and the topic while still being unbiased and nuanced, really.
Great. And Sophia, I'm going to guess that maybe presentation skills is one skill that you've learned from doing performances, as maybe someone who didn't want to do performances initially. What other skills do you think you've developed?
It definitely a public speaking skill as the performer. It has even helped me do projects and presentations in front of the classroom, as I have to memorize something like a 4 or 5 page script and then be able to reenact it as if you were in that time frame, the present time.
Kathia, did you have anything to add in terms of what skills you feel you've gained from being a History Day participant?
For me, it was definitely a lot more on the memorization aspect. Before entering NHD, I didn't really have a good relationship with history. I mostly thought of it like as pure memorization, so I didn't really like it since I was never good at it. But once I started to be able to understand how NHD really worked, it also really taught me how to memorize things in my own way, which was explaining them like it was a performance, essentially, which really did help me much more than just memorizing words on a text.
Great. And for our teachers, you've kind of been on the flip side where you've seen students participate over a number of years. What skills do you, and I know we talked a little bit earlier about, why you do History Day. What skills have you seen your students develop over the years? Regina?
So the obvious ones obviously are research and being able to write a bibliography, which is such an important skill. When you go off to higher education, you're going to have to write those bibliographies. But probably one of the most important things is perseverance. Sometimes students are not used to having to really stick with a project for long periods of time. Usually in schools, we assign, as a teacher, we assign something. The students have, maybe a couple of weeks to finish it. We give them a grade and then they're done with that topic. But History Day lasts, most of the year. And you really have to love what you're studying, but you also have to work through the frustration of either changing sometimes your opinion or changing how you're researching or changing what you wrote about it. So perseverance and sticking with something for a long period of time, getting into it very deeply is something that we don't always naturally promote with school assignments that have a limited lifespan, I guess. So perseverance, I think, is a great thing for students in life, as they're going to go off, to higher education, whether that's a trade school or college or an apprenticeship. Perseverance is going to be key to being able to learn how to get to become an expert at your topic. So we want these kids to be experts, and you need to stick with it. So I think that's a great skill. That's the skill I really appreciate. So,
John?
Yeah, I think some other what everybody said is just perfect, really and truly. But I think the idea of exactly research skills, the idea of writing and revising again and revising again, getting feedback, I think is really important as well. Particularly when you get this is what I think is great about judging. You get feedback from multiple perspectives. You have three judges very often that give you three different pieces of feedback, and you can take that, for what it's worth, and decide how you want to use that. But I think that's so valuable versus that one teacher who's giving you an opinion. I also think it really teaches a middle school student or a high school student, for that matter, about an adult audience. So many times we have projects that are intended for our class, for our own individual grade level. And I think presenting something out in that very much more mature way for that, like I said before, that adult audience, thinking that, oh my gosh, I have this very flashy title, or something that has this really, jazzy font to it. And I love it as the student. But then from the teacher perspective or from the adult judge perspective, that's not really as cohesive as it could be. Something that probably fits in a lot more appropriately with a project is a great suggestion for a student, and then to take that feedback and run with it. So I think that's another aspect that students can learn, most certainly.
And I've been a coordinator now for over a decade, and I often am wearing a History Day T-shirt when I go out on the weekend, and I have often had young adults who say to me, I did History Day, and they remember exactly what their project was. And it doesn't matter, with History Day, students can choose to participate in one of the regional contests. They don't have to. And some of these students never went to a contest. They just did it in the classroom, or they just went to regionals, or they went to states, whatever. But they remember the project years after doing it, and they remember what they learned. And that to me, and for many students, they've talked about it as a very transformative experience, and the one project that really prepared them for higher education. So I think that's kind of a big piece of it. We do have a question from Cindy. who asks, what piece of advice can the students offer about transitioning their research into a solid historical argument? Would any of our students like to take that one on? Nick.
Well, I would say just use your research as your evidence. Whatever you research, try to, in a way, direct it towards what you're trying to argue for, and then use that research and data that you find as your argument itself or as evidence for your argument. So it kind of makes everything a lot stronger, and you have things to back it up with. So you're not just going out there with a bunch of random research saying one thing when you have nothing that backs it up. So it's really just a matter of directing that research to act as evidence, and then you reason for that evidence, and that kind of one thing leads to another thing after that.
Do any of our other students want to talk about the process of transitioning their research into a historical argument? Because that's a really big piece of History Day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sophia?
What I find very helpful when I move from the research portion, our 30 pages of just random facts about the gold standard or a language or something like that, would be definitely to reread like what your solid argument after to somebody that has no idea what the topic is about, because then it might make sense to you because you know all these information. But once you move to somebody else that knows nothing about it, it might not even make sense to them later. And that's when you can help revise it to make it make sense to an outsider who doesn't know exactly what the topic is about.
That's a great suggestion. And we have one more question from Jenny. Do any of the students use Zotero to manage their citations? Would it help to include citation manager tips on a research guide? Can we, thumbs up or thumbs down on that? What do you think?
So I use EasyBib personally. That's kind of my thing, but it would definitely be useful to have a citation manager, kind of like tips about that in a research guide. Because my first 2 years, I would do my bibliography by hand because I had no idea EasyBib was allowed to be used. So just having those tips would make life a lot easier because I feel like my past projects would have been so much better if I had like previously known how to use these kind of things to help me. And once I figured it out, I ended up placing third at States. So going into it, if you know how to use it and if tips are available, it's going to make your life a lot easier.
And some of us had to, I won't say who on this call, had to do bibliographies before those things existed. So I won't call any of us out on that one. I did want to kind of pause for a second and ask Regina and Nick to talk a little bit. One of the things I love about History Day, and Regina, you were talking about this a little bit in terms of experiential learning and the opportunity to kind of go out and see objects and be in a place to really kind of get a sense of history. And one of the great things I think about National History Day is that it provides all kinds of other opportunities. Right now, we have a student who is at the University of Maryland who participated for many years, and she got a scholarship to be a college student at University of Maryland. But I wanted to have Nick and Regina talk a little bit about their recent participation in the Sacrifice for Freedom Student Teacher Institute. If you could start with just briefly how you got into that program and what it was all about, because you just returned from Hawaii not too long ago. And I think that is just such an amazing experience that you've had.
It was an amazing experience. I'll start and then I'm going to have Nick jump in. So in the fall, Mrs. McMahon and I were working with students, and one of the sort of emails that came through talked about this Sacrifice for Freedom opportunity and how teachers and students could apply to go, and they would choose 16 teams worldwide to attend. And when I saw that the focus was on the Pacific Theater, I think Mrs. McManaman and I both thought, you know what, Nick has such a passion for the Pacific Theater and for World War II. And even though Nick was at the high school and wasn't currently at that particular moment talking about History Day, although he did call us and say, hey, I want to work on a project, we thought we should present this to him. And we were just both so passionate about participating that we thought we have to apply. How amazing would it be to go to the place where history happened? it's a dream to be able to go that far away to Hawaii. Not only is Hawaii beautiful, but the historical significance of that part of the United States is tremendous. The application process was long, but not daunting. We each had to write an essay. We had to get letters of recommendation. We had to submit, like my teacher credentials, Nick's sort of resume. And then after we submitted all the paperwork and got all of that, then we just sort of had to wait. And we were very excited in January to find out that we were one of the 16 teams selected. But the work didn't stop there. That was the beginning of the work, because the next 7 months gave us 12 different modules to work on. And every module was another way of researching and getting more connected to the importance of American and Japanese strategy in World War II, specifically in the Pacific Theater. So we learned over those 7 months before we actually went on our trip. We did some writing. We did some collaborating with other teams that were going on the program. We researched a lot of the battles that took place in the Pacific Theater. We talked about the history of Hawaii. We talked about military strategy. We talked about Asian strategy, world strategy, China's involvement, Japan's involvement, the Philippines, the Solomon Islands. We spent a lot of time delving into the importance of this topic and the research. And then when we got to Hawaii, we had a solid background to understand why we were visiting the sites that we were visiting. Why were we at the Aviation Museum? Why were we on the USS Bowfin, which is a submarine? Why did we go to the Arizona Memorial and the Oklahoma Memorial? Why were we on the USS Missouri? All of these things are connected. And a lot of times when we teach students history, they don't get to see the important places, and they are not connected to that history because they haven't really seen it. So to me, that was the greatest piece, is to actually put students where history happens. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people know Hamilton. You want to be in the room where it happens, and that's a real thing. So it was amazing. I'll wait for Nick to chime in. Maybe he feels differently, but I don't think he does.
Yeah, I think just the hands-on aspect of it was amazing. Just being where it all happened, where American involvement in World War II. And just the research beforehand made it like another class almost. So going to Hawaii, although it was work, it almost felt like a reward for the past 7 months of what we were doing and kind of getting that connection to the Pacific Theater on a whole nother level. And once we were there, we understood what we were looking at. We weren't just tourists going around saying, oh, that looks cool. It was more so, oh, that looks cool because this, and this happened. It relates to this in that way. So it really just gave us that background, that foundation we needed to really understand and know what we were looking at and know what we were doing. And just being there in general took so much more away than I would have just in a classroom with a textbook.
Talk a little bit about your silent hero that you had to research and kind of explain what a silent hero is.
So part of the program is that we don't have to, but we do have to. We have to find someone from our state that we want to focus on, who actually is buried or memorialized at the National Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii. So obviously they, have passed away, but they were instrumental in that battle, in those battles, actually, in that theater. So we chose William Fournier from Connecticut. And he was a young man who died at the age of 29. He had been in the Navy for several years, had kind of a tragic upbringing, was kind of a restless kid, probably a kid that teachers would have said, oh, I don't know what's going to happen with him when he grows up. Some people discounted, the kind of contribution he was going to make in his life. Once he left the Navy, I think he discovered that he really wanted to be in the military, and he joined the Army and ended up getting sent to Guadalcanal and was instrumental in the reason that the U.S. were able to hold back the Japanese at Guadalcanal. So I'll let Nick tell a little bit more about his story. But when we were in Hawaii, we had researched him for months. And then when we were in Hawaii, we actually got to go to his gravesite, place flags there, place flowers there. And we wrote a eulogy, and Nick got to read the eulogy at a ceremony there at the cemetery. So Nick, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, so basically the whole research of the silent hero kind of went hand in hand with the modules we were doing. So we had the modules that were issued, but as we did those over the 7 months, we were tasked with our own research as a side to that. And throughout the 7 months, we got better and better understanding of William Grant Fournier, his life, and what he did in the military. And it was really hard at first finding any information about him. He was basically a ghost on the internet. Like, the only thing you can really find is his Medal of Honor citation. So we started to dig through things like Ancestry and newspapers.com. I ended up going to Rhode Island because that's where Sergeant Fournier ended up moving when he was really young. And I went to a World War II museum there. And the staff there helped me with my research. They were going on newspapers.com and finding all these things. And we began chasing little, like, super small leads that you really wouldn't. All of a sudden, we had a eulogy put together. And just looking back, we found super small amounts of information about him that allowed us to connect the dots to get the big picture. And just being able to go there and eulogize him and give him the recognition that he never received really was really emotional. And it really felt good to be able to bring his memory back, because he gave his life for us to be here today, and nobody knows who he is really, except for a couple of his family members and a couple of historians. He's really just kind of off the grid entirely.
Well, it sounds like an amazing experience, and I'd encourage teachers and students to apply for Sacrifice for Freedom, because what an amazing experience. And so I want to thank you both for sharing that with our viewers. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, so I have a question from the audience for everyone, and that is there anything, and this is mostly for students, but is there anything you learned during your research that you found fascinating, but you were forced to cut out because of your project in terms of limits of space or time? Go ahead, Nick.
So the exhibit, we have a 500-word count, and looking back at the diplomatic history of Pearl Harbor, a lot of it starts way back when Japanese expansion first began, and how that whole resource run they went on kind of branched out, and they ended up getting into a war with Russia and everybody. And I had to leave that entire early years sectional note, which is really what pushed Japan into attacking the United States. So that whole timeline kind of got broken up a little bit just because of space and time. And I feel like if I had maybe 1,000 words, I would have done so much better in the competition, because I would have had so many words to explain it with.
Yeah, it's not easy. As historians know, it's not easy paring down what you're going to include. Marianne, Sophia, yeah, Sophia.
Since our performance could only be 10 minutes long, that's actually one of the reasons why we had 14 drafts of a script, is because like we kept going to 11 minutes or 8 minutes when we cut stuff out. One thing that we cut out that was actually a very important part of why we chose McKinley versus Bryan was when, during William Jennings Bryan's speech, he kept referencing McKinley. He had this whole paragraph about how he wasn't going to let the upper class diminish the lower class, but we ended up having to cut that out because just from the time relation, it wouldn't work, and we wanted to keep the main part about how the farmers are being almost segregated from the rest of the world, or from the US.
I wanted to go more into the Bay of Pigs and how that led into the how it led into the rising tension between Cuba and the U.S., leading to Cuba allying itself with the USSR, leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we didn't have enough word space to accommodate that. And I also wanted to go more in depth into the hotline that was established after the Cuban Missile Crisis, that served as a diplomatic hotline, so the president can easily communicate with the Secretary of State over there, because its communication was a large issue back in the day, since they had slower since they didn't have any since it wasn't as reliable. They didn't have any reliable ways to communicate that was fast, quick, and discreet.
Thank you. And maybe as the last question for all of our participants, students, and teachers, in a few sentences, as you think about next year, what advice would you give to a student who is participating in Connecticut History Day for the first time? What advice would you give to a brand new Connecticut History Day student? Nick?
Use EasyBib. It's going to help you a lot. Don't make the same mistakes that I did with that, and chase your interest. Like if you're interested in a certain aspect of history, you can make it work no matter what the theme is. There's been a lot of themes where World War II has been thing to incorporate into it, like last year, but I was able to find a way because I didn't give up on the topic. So just really chase your interest, use EasyBib, get that bibliography done the right way the first time, and you'll set yourself up for success.
Awesome. Great advice. Other advice from panelists?
To
Cynthia?
also add on to that, yeah. When we first started, like this was back in our 8th grade year, we were really focused on like the research aspect before creating a first draft of our performance. So that led to us like having an abundance of research, like 30 pages, but not enough like ways to implement it into our actual performance. So I would say like get general knowledge of your topic first, and then start building or an idea or like a draft of where you would want your performance to go. And then keep researching, because the researching doesn't stop at the start. You also have to continuously search up different things while you're writing the script as well.
Yeah, I can remember one of our students who made the national contest was doing an interview like the week before he went to nationals because he had found a little nugget to chase after. Any other advice from our panelists? Regina.
I'm going to jump in as a teacher because for students who are thinking about documentaries or websites, those two types of projects require some technical knowledge. So if you're thinking documentary or website, you do have some sort of a learning curve. Like you need to know how to use your technology. And if you've never created a website before, you really need to get very familiar with Web Central. It's great. It works, it works beautifully, but you're not going to be able to create your website overnight just because you have all your research or you have your thesis statement written or you have some photos. You need to know how to work that system. And the same thing with documentaries. Make sure that you have software that you are familiar using, that is editing software. So for those folks who focus a lot on technology, you need to give yourself some time to learn that technology. Don't think you're just going to put a website or a documentary together, just because you have all of your other work done in just a couple of hours. You're not. You're going to need some lead time, and you got to start that early. Don't leave it till the end to learn about your technology.
That is great advice. Any other advice?
If you're working with a team, maintain communication at all times, because there's always going to be something wrong on some other end. Like someone needs to read over the bibliography. There's going to be typos. There's going to be grammar mistakes, and it's generally just a good idea to make sure your team agrees on everything.
Also really good advice. Anyone else? Oh, Sophia?
Something that I know that helps a lot is just listen to your peers. Like Kathy and I would communicate a lot, but even our mentor, our Mr. Z, our teacher, if he didn't keep, but like since we're in a different school, he's in the middle school and we're in the high school, he would email us like every week and it's like, where's your bibliography? I want to make sure it's good. And we're like, oh, we only have 27 sources on it. We would maintain communication. He actually gave us a lot of advice on how to better our performance. At some cases, maybe even better than some of the judges' feedback, because he knows us well, much better than other judges would.
Anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for a really great discussion today about Connecticut History Day. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in for this conversation at noon. I'd invite viewers to learn more about Connecticut History Day. It is an affiliate program of National History Day. as a teacher, you can have your students participate. Students, you can participate through your school or even independently. And a great way to learn about the program is to serve as a judge, which I think is how some folks on this call began their knowledge of History Day. But you can find information by going to our website, which is historydayct.org. And if you're a teacher, you can join us for our first. And so this is my contact information. You can email me at this, my email address, rebecca.tabor@ctdemocracycenter.org. The Connecticut Democracy Center is the sponsor of National History Day with funding support from Connecticut Humanities. Or you can visit our historydayct.org website. And for teachers, we will be having 3 educators workshops this year. Our first is on Friday, September the 30th. It's an all-day event at the Connecticut River Museum in Essex, Connecticut. We have 2 others later in the year, which will help teachers as they help students through the History Day journey. And I would invite our viewers to join us for upcoming programs here at Connecticut's Old State House. And I want to thank everyone for being with us today. And we hope you've enjoyed today's programs. Students, great to see you and looking forward to seeing everyone in person this year again.